The church bells had barely stopped ringing when the betrayal unfolded. Emily Dawson, 7 months pregnant, stood in black at her husband Daniel's funeral. Tears clung to her lashes. But it was not grief that shook her most. It was humiliation. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, the Dawson family did not even glance at her with sympathy. Instead, their lips curved into cruel smiles, already plotting the final blow. When the will was read, Emily braced herself for the promise Daniel had whispered to her so many times. He had assured her that she and their 10-year-old son Lucas would be safe, that everything he worked for would protect them. She clutched her son's hand, praying those words would come true. But the lawyer's calm voice was drowned out by laughter. Her sister-in-law Victoria leaned forward with venom in her eyes. The house, the business, gone, stripped away in a single moment. All they left her was a rusted van that smelled of mildew and despair. They tossed the keys into her lap as if tossing scraps to a beggar, mocking her while taking everything she had helped build. The business she once designed with love, the home where she carried memories. It was all stolen with one cruel decision. Standing outside in the drizzle, Emily stared at the van. Its paint peeled like skin, its doors sagged, and its broken windows reflected her own shattered life. She pressed her hand to her swollen belly while Lucas clung to her side. The message was clear. She had been cast out, with nothing but a child, an unborn baby, and a worthless van. Yet in that moment of despair, a fire sparked quietly inside her chest. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and old paper, a place where truth was meant to be recorded with ink and signatures. Emily Dawson sat rigid in the chair, her swollen belly pressing against the wooden armrest, while her 10-year-old son Lucas clutched her hands so tightly his knuckles turned white. She told herself to breathe. Daniel had promised her that everything would be secured, that the years they spent building Dawson Floral and Design would not be taken from her. She repeated his words in her mind like a prayer as the lawyer cleared his throat and unfolded the will. His voice was steady, measured, almost too calm for the storm it unleashed. To my beloved wife, Emily Dawson, I leave our home at Willow Lane, my controlling shares in Dawson Floral and Design, and the 1972 van. For a moment, Emily's heart lifted. The house, the business, the proof that Daniel had protected her. She turned her eyes to Lucas, who looked up at her with a spark of relief. But the moment shattered like glass when cruel laughter cut across the room. Victoria Dawson leaned forward, her nails tapping against the polished table, her voice dripping with poison. That is not how this works. Emily blinked, confused. Excuse me? Richard Dawson Sr. slammed his palm against the table, his face twisted with arrogance. The house and the business are Dawson property. You married into this family. You do not own it. The only thing you will ever get is that broken van. Frankly, you should be grateful we are letting you keep even that. The lawyer frowned, flipping through the folder again. That is not what the will says. Mr. Dawson clearly specified. Silence, Richard barked, his voice trembling with anger but sharp enough to slice through the air. He leaned closer to Emily, his breath hot with disdain. You want to fight this in court? Go ahead. Let us see how far you get with no money and a child on your hip while carrying another in your belly. Do you really think you can survive against us? The words struck like whips. Emily felt Lucas squeeze her hand harder, his small frame shaking beside her. The room seemed to tilt, the smell of stale coffee mixing with the sour taste of fear in her mouth. Her throat tightened as she opened her lips, but no words came. She could see the trap clearly. They wanted her to collapse, to argue, to scream. They wanted a fight she could never win on their turf. 15 minutes later, she found herself standing outside in the drizzle with nothing but a single set of van keys pressed into her palm. The door of the office closed behind her with the echo of laughter still ringing in her ears. Her tears blurred the gray outline of the city streets, but she refused to let them fall in front of Lucas. Her son looked up at her with wide eyes, his lips trembling. Mom, is it true? Did they take everything? Emily swallowed hard, forcing the storm inside her to stay hidden. She crouched down, ignoring the ache in her back and the weight of her unborn child pressing into her ribs. She brushed a strand of wet hair from Lucas's forehead and tried to smile, though her lips barely moved. We still have each other. She stood again and turned toward the parking lot. The van sat crooked under a leaning lamppost, rust creeping across its frame like rot on a dying tree. Its windows were streaked with grime, and one door sagged as though it no longer believed in standing tall. To anyone else, it was nothing but scrap metal. To Emily, it was humiliation made solid. As she approached, the keys rattled in her hand. mocking her with every step. She slid them into the lock, opened the door, and was met with the stench of mildew, oil, and time. Lucas climbed in first, his small hands exploring the torn vinyl seats as if searching for comfort in the ruins. Emily followed slowly, her heart pounding with a mixture of shame and fury. Sitting behind the wheel, she felt the weight of silence. The Dawson family had stripped her of her home, her business, her dignity. They believed they had broken her completely. But as the drizzle turned to a fine mist, Emily closed her eyes and pressed her hand to her belly. Inside her, a child kicked with fierce insistence, as if reminding her that this story was not finished. Her lips parted and a whisper escaped, a vow carried only to herself. They think I am defeated, but I will rise. This van will not be the end of us. The keys glinted faintly in the dim light. Somewhere behind the layers of rust and despair, the van held a secret that no one in the Dawson family could steal. Emily did not know it yet, but the very object they had given her in mockery would become her salvation. The first night inside the van was a nightmare painted in silence. The rain beat against the roof, like fists pounding to remind her of everything she had lost. Emily Dawson sat in the driver's seat, her belly heavy, her hands trembling as she wrapped an old blanket around her son. Lucas tried to be brave, his small shoulders stiff, his eyes darting between the cracked windows as if the darkness outside might swallow them whole. The seat cushions reeked of mildew. The air was thick with dust and stale oil. Each breath carried the taste of abandonment. Lucas whispered, his voice trembling, "Mom, we are not really staying here, right? This is only for tonight." Emily looked at him, forcing her lips into something that resembled a smile, but her silence told the truth. By morning, the cold had carved itself into their bones. Emily pushed herself out of the van, her shoes sinking into mud as she walked to the corner store. She counted her last few coins and bought a loaf of day-old bread. When she returned, Lucas was curled in the back seat, drawing with his finger on the condensation that fogged the glass. He looked up with hope when she handed him a piece of bread. He ate slowly, as if stretching every bite could delay the hunger that clawed at his stomach. Whispers followed them everywhere. Strangers passing the van muttered, "That is the Dawson widow. She lost everything. Now she is living in that wreck." Another voice sneered, "She was always too proud." Guess pride does not feed children. Emily heard every word, but she kept her head down, clutching Lucas's hand as if it was the last thread keeping her anchored. Nights were the hardest. The van groaned with every gust of wind. Shadows moved across the broken glass, and laughter echoed from the nearby street. Lucas would press close to his mother, his little hand gripping her sleeve. Emily would whisper into the dark, "If this is all they left us, we will make it enough." She repeated it until the words felt carved into her bones. Days blurred together. Emily scavenged bulletin boards for odd jobs. Anything that paid enough for another loaf of bread, another small meal. Sometimes she cleaned houses. Sometimes she arranged flowers from discarded stems, her hands remembering the craft that once filled her shop with color and fragrance. Lucas stayed close, quiet but watchful, drawing shapes on scraps of paper he found in the trash. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Emily sat on the narrow bench in the back of the van, watching Lucas sleep with his head against her lap. She brushed his hair gently and whispered to herself, "They think this van is my prison. They do not know it will be my forge." The words lit a small spark in her chest. It was not enough to erase the hunger, the shame, the ache of being cast aside, but it was enough to keep her alive. Every insult that passed her ears became fuel. Every look of pity became proof that no one expected her to rise again. And because no one expected it, she realized she had a chance to surprise them all. On the third week, when she scrubbed the back door of the van, trying to make the space less suffocating, her sponge caught on a sharp edge. Rust flaked away, and something strange gleamed beneath the dying surface. She paused, her breath catching in her throat, but she did not shout. Not yet. She simply pressed her palm against the spot, her heart thundering. Emily knew one truth that night as she lay awake beside her son. The Dawsons had given her what they thought was worthless, but hidden inside this van was something far more valuable than they could ever imagine, and she would hold on to that secret until the world was ready to see it. The day began like all the others, gray and heavy with silence. Emily Dawson dragged a sponge across the corroded body of the van, trying to scrub away the filth that made every breath inside feel like decay. She was not cleaning out of pride. She was cleaning to make survival less unbearable for her son. Lucas sat nearby, sketching little houses and gardens on scraps of paper, his imagination building the life they no longer had. Her hand caught on a jagged edge where rust had eaten deep. The sponge tore, and beneath the flaking metal she saw a strange shimmer. At first she thought it was a trick of light, some cruel reflection from the dying sun. She leaned closer. The glow was not fleeting. It was real. Her fingers trembled as she scraped away more of the brittle rust. Bit by bit, the surface peeled back to reveal a warm gleam unlike any steel she had ever known. The color was rich, alive, and it pulsed under the weak daylight as if the van itself was breathing. Emily froze, her pulse hammering against her throat. She pressed her palm to the exposed patch and felt the impossible weight beneath. The panel was far heavier than it should have been. The truth came slowly, like a storm crawling over the horizon. This van was not only made of steel. Beneath the rust, it was gold. Her breath caught in her chest. For a moment she imagined herself shouting, laughing, calling out to Lucas that their nightmare was over, but the memory of Daniel's voice slid into her mind. He had told her once with quiet certainty, "This van will be your safety net." She had dismissed it as sentimentality. Now she understood. He had hidden their future in plain sight. Emily closed her eyes and let the revelation sink into her bones. Yet she did not cry out or rush to strip the van clean. She knew better. Secrets this powerful were fragile. If the Dawson family discovered the truth, they would come for her again with sharper claws and deeper cruelty. She turned to see Lucas drawing stick figures holding hands. His innocence cut through her spiraling thoughts. She could not risk his safety. She would protect this secret with silence. That night the van felt different. The rusted shell no longer seemed like a coffin, but like a locked vault filled with unseen promise. Emily lay awake, her hand resting on her belly, feeling her unborn child stir. Every kick reminded her that she carried not only life but also destiny. The temptation to reveal the truth gnawed at her, but Emily hardened herself. She would not squander this discovery on reckless joy. Instead, she whispered into the shadows, "Not yet." The next morning, she tested her courage. With a small chisel borrowed from a day's labor, she pried a thin strip loose from the inner panel of the van. The metal broke away with effort, and when it slipped into her palm, the weight confirmed her suspicion. Gold, pure and solid. She wrapped it carefully in cloth and tucked it into her coat pocket. With cautious steps, she walked across town to a small jeweler known for his discretion. The man examined the piece without a word. His eyes flickered. Then he nodded and handed her a stack of bills that felt heavier than any coin she had ever held. Emily's heart pounded as she left the shop. With that single sale, she bought warm clothes for Lucas, food that filled their bellies, and vitamins to protect the child growing inside her. For the first time in months, she did not feel like a beggar. She felt like a strategist holding a weapon no one else could see. When they returned to the van that evening, Lucas looked at her with wide eyes. "Mom, you are smiling." Emily kissed his forehead and whispered, "Some secrets are blessings. My love, and this one will change everything." She gazed at the van as the sun sank behind it. To the world, it still looked like a worthless wreck. But Emily knew it was the golden heart of her rebirth, and she vowed to guard it with silence until the day she was strong enough to show the truth. The van became her silent accomplice. By day it looked like nothing more than a rusted relic abandoned in a corner lot, but by night it whispered promises only Emily Dawson could hear. She had discovered its secret, and now every decision she made was shaped by that hidden glow of gold beneath the surface. She moved carefully, never drawing attention away. One evening, when Lucas had fallen asleep with his head against her lap, she slipped from the van with a small chisel hidden in her coat. The streetlight flickered above as she pried loose a narrow strip from the inside of the rear door. The sound of metal breaking made her heart thunder, but when the piece came free and sat heavy in her palm, she knew she was holding their future. Wrapped tightly in cloth, the fragment became her passport. She walked across town to a discreet jeweler who asked no questions. He weighed it, nodded, and counted bills onto the counter. Emily's fingers shook as she gathered the money. It was more than she had earned in months of desperate work. With it, she bought food that filled Lucas's stomach, vitamins that nourished the child in her belly, and warm clothes that allowed them both to face the cold without trembling. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Lucas smiled more often. His cheeks regained color. Emily felt strength return to her body, yet she did not allow herself to grow careless. She sold only in small pieces, spacing out her visits to the jeweler, making sure no one could suspect the van held anything more than decay. Weeks later, after 3 careful sales, Emily had saved enough to do more than survive. She rented a narrow stall in the corner of a local street market. It was nothing like the bright storefront she and Daniel once owned, but it was a beginning. She bought secondhand vases, buckets for water, and a few bundles of flowers from wholesalers who did not bother to ask why a widow with tired eyes wanted them. Her hands, once stiff with cold and sorrow, remembered their old rhythm. She arranged lilies and roses with precision, creating beauty out of fragile stems. Passers-by stopped, drawn by the unexpected artistry in such a humble stall. "Who is the new florist?" Someone whispered. Another replied, "That is Dawson's widow. I thought she was living in a van." Emily heard the whispers but did not flinch. Instead, she greeted customers with a calm smile, remembering names, asking about anniversaries, slipping small sprigs of baby's breath into bouquets as gifts of luck. Slowly, coins clinked into her cash box, then bills, then repeat customers who returned not just for flowers, but for the feeling of being seen. At night, she returned to the van, where Lucas waited with drawings of gardens and flower shops. He would hold up his sketches and say, "One day, Mom, this will be ours." Emily kissed his forehead and whispered back, "One day is closer than you think." The gold inside the van remained their greatest secret. Each hidden fragment she sold was another brick in the foundation of their future. Yet Emily never let greed guide her. She took only what she needed, saving the rest for the battles ahead. The Dawsons believed they had stripped her of dignity, but the truth was growing in silence, like roots spreading beneath soil. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of her market stall, Emily looked around at the flowers arranged in color and symmetry. Customers were already waiting. The air smelled of eucalyptus and roses, rich and fresh. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt pride that was not crushed by grief. She glanced toward the street where the van sat quietly, its rusted frame hiding the treasure within. To the world, it was still worthless. To Emily, it was a vault of power. She whispered to herself as she tied a ribbon around a bouquet. "They gave me this van to break me. They had no idea it would make me unstoppable." The little market stall that once looked fragile began to transform into a beacon of life. Every morning, Emily Dawson arrived before sunrise, her arms filled with buckets of flowers bought from wholesalers. Her belly no longer heavy with pregnancy, but her heart full with determination. She worked with relentless precision, cutting stems, arranging blossoms, and tying ribbons as if each bouquet carried her soul inside. Customers felt it. They felt seen. They felt remembered. They felt important. Whispers turned into talk, and talk became praise. People who had once pointed at the van and mocked her now lined up at her stall, asking for her artistry to brighten their homes. Weddings and funerals. "She has a gift," an old woman murmured. "She does not just sell flowers. She creates memories." Emily's name spread through the neighborhood and beyond. Each coin that fell into her box was reinvested into more flowers, better tools, and a vision that kept growing like vines reaching for the sun. Lucas helped by carrying small buckets of water, handing ribbons, and greeting customers with the smile of a boy who finally felt safe again. At night, he showed Emily his sketches, drawings of a real flower shop with wide windows and shelves stacked high. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Oh, we will get there," while Emily's corner of the market bloomed with life. The Dawson empire rotted from within. Mismanagement devoured what once had been a thriving business. Orders went unfilled. Suppliers stopped extending credit, and employees walked away as salaries went unpaid. Customers who once trusted the Dawson name now complained loudly. They cannot even deliver on time. Someone scoffed at a gathering. Another added, "Their flowers arrive wilted. It is pathetic." Emily never joined in the gossip. She listened quietly while trimming stems, her silence louder than any insult. Yet deep inside, she felt justice unfolding, not because she had lifted a hand against them, but because their own arrogance was collapsing under its weight. The newspapers began to report what everyone had already guessed. Headlines screamed, "Dawson Floral bankrupt. Dawson family home listed for immediate sale." The name that had once carried authority was now a punchline whispered in markets and offices. The very people who had laughed at Emily when she walked away with nothing but a van now watched their own fortune crumble into dust. In contrast, Emily's stall became a sanctuary. She greeted brides-to-be with warmth, consoled widows with gentle words, and celebrated birthdays with children who clutched flowers almost bigger than their arms. She remembered names, remembered stories, remembered faces. Customers returned not just for flowers, but for the kindness that came wrapped in every bouquet. Soon, she saved enough to leave the market stall behind. On a quiet corner where sunlight poured across the street, Emily rented a small shop with green awnings and wide windows. She painted the name in gold letters across the front, Lucas and Grace Flowers. It was a tribute to her children, the boy who had endured beside her and the daughter she now held in her arms. The air inside the shop smelled of eucalyptus and roses. of renewal and triumph. Neighbors whispered in awe. "Is that her shop?" The widow who lived in the van. Another replied softly, "Yes, and look at her now. She built all of this from nothing." Emily's eyes often drifted to the van still parked nearby, its rusted body unchanged to the world but sacred to her. It was not simply a vehicle anymore. It was a vault, a lifeline, a reminder that the Dawsons had thought they were giving her shame, but had unknowingly handed her salvation. Meanwhile, Richard Dawson Sr. struggled to face creditors. Victoria no longer walked with her head held high. Their wealth was gone, their home auctioned, their reputation shredded by scandal. Emily did not gloat. She did not need to. The universe had delivered its verdict without her raising a word. One afternoon, as Emily arranged lilies for a bride, a customer whispered near the door, "The Dawsons are finished." "Did you hear? Their house is gone." Emily kept her eyes on the bouquet, her hands steady, her heart calm. She tied the ribbon and offered the flowers with a smile. Inside, she felt a quiet exhale of justice. Not revenge, justice. Emily Dawson had risen from ashes that others thought would bury her. Her shop was not just a business, it was a symbol. Every bloom in her window shouted a truth the world now recognized. You cannot destroy someone who chooses to grow again. The little bell above the flower shop door rang with its usual chime, but the sound carried a weight that made Emily Dawson pause mid-ribbon tie. She looked up, expecting a bride or a mother searching for comfort in blooms. Instead, she saw two familiar shadows step inside. Richard Dawson Sr. looked smaller than she remembered. His suit, once crisp and expensive, sagged at the elbows and hung loose on his frame. The man who once slammed his palm on polished tables now walked with hesitant steps, his eyes avoiding hers. Beside him stood Victoria, no longer draped in arrogance but in exhaustion. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her lips pale, her eyes flicking nervously at the gold-painted letters across the window that spelled out Lucas and Grace Flowers. For a long moment the shop seemed to hold its breath. The scent of lilies and roses filled the silence, a sharp contrast to the humiliation that clung to the two who had once thrown Emily into the gutter. Richard cleared his throat, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. "Emily," he began, "we have fallen on difficult times. The house is gone. The business is gone. We have nowhere to stay. We were hoping. Just until we find our footing again." Victoria's lips parted, but she could not muster the superiority she once wielded like a weapon. Instead, she looked at the floor and whispered, "We need your help." Emily's hands continued moving, tucking eucalyptus into a bouquet, as though their presence was no more disruptive than a draft from the open door. She tied the ribbon with deliberate calm, her fingers steady, her face serene. Only when the bouquet was finished did she finally raise her eyes. "I remember," she said softly, her voice carrying more weight than any shout. "I remember the day you told me the van was all I deserved, that my children and I deserved nothing good." Richard flinched as if struck. Victoria's gaze darted toward the counter, where Emily's gold-plated pen rested beside her receipt book. The realization flickered in her eyes. The gold in the shop, the flowers flourishing, the customers smiling outside, it all spoke of a truth she could not deny. Emily slid the bouquet across the counter to the waiting bride, who looked confused but grateful. The bride offered payment and left with a smile, the bell chiming again as the door closed behind her. Emily turned back to the two faces that had once laughed at her ruin. "I am afraid," she continued, her tone still calm yet unyielding, "that I do not have room." Richard's mouth opened, a desperate plea trembling on his lips. But Emily held up her hand. "Some things are too small to hold the weight of people who once tried to break them. My shop, my home, my heart, they are not places for you." Victoria's eyes brimmed with tears, but she said nothing. She pulled at her father's sleeve, urging him toward the door. Together they stepped back into the street, their departure marked only by the faint chime of the bell. Emily embraced freedom in her shop, built without her past. A rusted van symbolized her rise. While she denied her family entry with grace, the shop stood on the corner of the street like a quiet miracle, its green awning stretched outward, catching sunlight that poured across the gold-painted letters. Lucas and Grace Flowers. Every passerby slowed their steps to look. Some entered for bouquets, others simply paused at the window to watch the colors bloom behind the glass. Inside, the air was rich with roses, lilies, eucalyptus, and baby's breath, a fragrance of renewal that seemed to wrap itself around everyone who crossed the threshold. Emily Dawson moved gracefully among the arrangements. She greeted each customer by name, asked about their lives, remembered birthdays and anniversaries. Her hands tied ribbons with precision while her voice soothed with calm warmth. She had built a sanctuary, not just a store. Each bouquet was more than flowers. It was proof that she had survived, that she had risen, that she had refused to break. Behind the counter, little Lucas stacked ribbons and vases with the energy of a boy who finally carried joy instead of fear. His laughter filled the corners of the shop where once silence had ruled. Beside him, baby Grace slept peacefully in a woven basket, her chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of innocence. Emily looked at them often, her heart swelling with a pride she could not measure, yet her eyes always returned to the window. Beyond the busy street, in the same crooked parking space where it had always been, the van remained. Rust covered its body. The doors sagged. Strangers saw only a worthless wreck. But to Emily, that van was the spine of her journey. It was her exile and her deliverance. Her humiliation and her redemption. It had been the prison she feared and the vault that saved her. She never moved it. She never hid it. Customers sometimes asked why she kept that eyesore so close to her beautiful shop. Emily only smiled and replied, "It is part of the story." They would laugh politely, not knowing the truth. She preferred it that way. The secret belonged to her, to Lucas, and to Grace. The gold within had built their new world, but it was not the metal alone that had given her strength. It was the choice to fight, the refusal to surrender, the fire that would not die. The Dawson family had vanished into obscurity. Their mansion sold at auction. Their business dissolved into bankruptcy. Their arrogance dissolved along with their fortune. People whispered about them with pity now, not envy. Emily never spoke of them. They were ghosts of another life, shadows that had tried to choke her light but had failed. One evening as the sun slipped low, the shop glowed with golden light. Emily sat at the counter with Lucas drawing beside her and Grace cooing softly in her basket. She looked at her children, then at the flowers, then at the van outside. She thought of Daniel, of his quiet smile and the words he had left her. "This van will be your safety net." She finally understood. He had not left her money, not left her power. He had left her the chance to prove herself, the chance to build a freedom no one could steal. She brushed a stray petal from the counter and whispered to the air, "You gave me exactly what I needed." For a moment she imagined him standing at the doorway, his arms crossed, pride glowing in his eyes. The thought did not break her. It steadied her. That night, Emily closed the shop and stood outside, breathing the cool air. The van sat under the lamppost, still rusted, still broken to anyone who dared to glance. But to her it glowed with memory. It reminded her that gold can hide in the ugliest places, that people can laugh at your worth, mock your struggle, strip you of everything, and yet in their cruelty they may hand you the very key to your freedom. Emily embraced her identity beyond the Dawson name, highlighting the significance of small things, transforming adversity into freedom, and finding value in life's hidden treasures. From betrayal to triumph, Emily turned a rusted van into freedom and built Lucas and Grace flowers from ashes. If her journey inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more powerful stories of resilience and hope.